Okay, yeah, thanks for the introduction. I'm Runzi Zhang from the Georgia Tech. I hope everyone here had a good lunch. And yeah, today I will be honored here to starting my presentation about our research. Can I go back? Yeah, on the hitchhiking vaccine enhancing the botnet remediation with the remote code deployment reuse. As we all know, the botnet remediation has been a long battle between the botnet operator against the researchers and the law enforcement. We always see the news like the botnet rebuild, botnet getting survival from the takedown attempts has been pop up. So why this botnet takedown has been so hard? We're trying to understanding this problem by looking into the procedures taken by our incident responder, Peter, to take down this botnet. So assuming the botnet is operated by the botnet operator, which controls the communication backends to getting the communication between the list of the infected bots. To take down this botnet, Peter must firstly perform the reverse engineering on the front-end bots to pinpointing the CNC server backends. And after that, Peter has a few options. Actually, he can actually perform a DNS blocking in order to cut off the communication between the infected bots with the CNC backends. Alternatively, Peter can actually set up his own server and redirecting all the traffic from the infected bot to that server, so-called the sinkholing of the server to take down the botnet. So all this just facing the same failure when the botnet operator is launching the backup server, and in that case, they can pushing the updates to the infected bots to regain the control. Just as what has been done in the TrickBot survives during the 2020. And meanwhile, the Peter's all the efforts will be meaningless. So this just quickly review one of the biggest problem, because as Peter is trying to take down the botnet through the backend, the victim system may still remain infected by the bots. So let's see, ideally, Peter should actually clean the victim device. Assume the Peter can actually send in some message to the device owner, he can actually trying to send the guidelines for the device owner to clean up their device by themselves. Alternatively, if Peter can actually push some code from his side to the botnet, he can actually just push a remediation payload to run on the infected device and clean the malware by itself. For any of these cases, when the botnet operator is trying to launching the backup server, they will no longer get any opportunity to regain the control because the infected system has been cleaned up. And this is the ultimate goal of our research. The biggest insight from our research is building on top of the attacker's favorite tactics, which is the malware author is actually the big fan of the remote payload deployment. So let's say has been very aggressively discussed from the earliest talk. Actually, the malware author is trying to dynamically deploying their code. They try to separating the malicious code from the CNC backend. In that case, this enables one of the biggest benefits. In that case, they can launching their app on the App Store and for easy distribution, and also bypassing the vetting systems. So in that case, some end users are getting tricks to launching this botnet on their device. The bot will try to communicate with the CNC backends and pulling the malicious payload and running any bad code locally in the infected device. And besides of the benefits of the launching the app on the Play Store, it also enables the attackers to also dynamically deploying their malicious codes for different cyber attacks. Even they can just selling their botnet for the other cyber attackers for some profits. So let's look back into the Peter scenario. He can actually sinkholing and gaining control of the CNC backends and redirecting all traffic. So let's think he can actually taking one step further. If Peter can just pushing some remediation payload from the sinkhole CNC server to the infected device, he can actually just using that code to either notify the end users or trying to uninstall and interrupt the execution of the front-end bots. Unfortunately, with any chance, there will be always challenges. So to fulfill these objectives, Peter must firstly identify the payload hosting CNC backends and understand the payload deployment routine implemented by the front-end bots. And thirdly, Peter must rapidly craft the remediation payload that can be correctly fetched, loaded, and executed by the bots. And all this compiles together to be a very time-consuming and labor-intensive reverse engineering task. So the things can be even more complex. When in this research, we look into the two types of the remote payload. For the naive case, the attackers can just running the compiled Java binaries, which can be executed with the code reflection. Alternatively, the attacker can actually running the JavaScript code, which is running with the web view. The web view is a very common component in most of the mobile apps to serving the web content for the end users. And there's actually one of the biggest feature from this kind of web view case because they can engaging with the system APIs predefined in the malware. To give a quick idea of the JavaScript interface example, here is like the code snipped from one of the running example we presented in this paper. This is actually one of the Java API has been implemented by the malware in the malware, and also the API has been labeled by the green annotation with the JavaScript interface. In case the malware is fetching the JavaScript payload from the remote server, this JavaScript payload actually invoke these APIs. And in this scenario, it's actually passing the parameter called command to actually the system API, which is running this command as a Linux shell command, which scanning the attacker with the arbitrary code execution capabilities. So to solve the whole problem, actually, we propose the ICO as the automatic forensic pipeline for remediating the front-end bots by hitchhiking on their payload deployment routines. The end goal for the ICO is trying to firstly formally modeling the deployment routine by starting with the vertices instantiation. So specifically, ICO just taking the malware's input and perform the force execution on it. To trigger the payload deployment routine related APIs to be executed, so here we look into the 3 types, like including the payload fetching, payload loading, and the payload execution behaviors, as shown up here. So meanwhile, as ICO is actually triggering those events, it's also like passively perform the runtime context logging to take into some context information when it's trying to sandbox the malware, including the not only limited to the backends when it's trying to fetch in the remote payload or the file path when the API is engaging with the local file system. So as we having the vertices and also the runtime context information, the next step of our ICO is to perform the formal model instantiation. So here we define the large table for the formal definitions in terms of the different kind of the type of the vertices. The basic idea is that we implementing different methods to building the data dependent edges between the vertices. So as most people have know, like the data dependency sometimes it can be false positives heavily. So in that case, to solve that problem, we rely on some we predefined the IGN and agile assertions, and rely on the pre-captured context information from the last module to verify these edges and removing the false positives. So as a result, we're getting the modeled routines here. The next question is like the ICO has to tell the Peter what the routine is like, and now Peter can push in the code from the hit server to the infected boss. The question is like, what's the capabilities earned by Peter? To answer this question, we perform the in vivo influence analysis with ICO to stemming out from these modeled routines to identify the capabilities that the remediation payload can reach to influence the front-end boss. And in this paper, we look into the 5 different capabilities as a proof of concept, and all of these 5 capabilities, they will be, at the end of the day, to reaching to the 2 goals. Either to remove or interrupt with the boss execution, or they can just send the notification to the device owners. Last but not least, with the different capabilities from the model routines, the next step for ICO is to generating this payload remediation payload templates. So ICO do this by just simply mapping the reachable in vivo influence to the remediation templates, and also ICO generating the code, generating the code accordingly. Additionally, ICO also provides the payload deployment routines for the incident responders. So in that case, they can complete this template and the package, test, and deploy this remediation payload to the front-end bot for the takedown. So let's say to this end, Peter can actually remediate the bot with ICO, as ICO has already reviewed the season servers has been talked to by the front-end bots and generating the remediation payload for Peter to deploy with. The next step for Peter will be very straightforward. He can just complete this code and test, package, and deploy that in a fast and confident way. So before I'm touching about the ICO's experiment setup and takedown evaluation, let me just quickly shout out for our collaborator Netscope, who is one of the cloud and edge security provider aims to identify and proactively mitigating the malware attacks. With their help, we are able to evaluate ICO with 702 samples across 22 families, and here those malwares have been confirmed to running either some Java binaries or JavaScript payloads, remote payloads. Among those samples, we found that ICO can be effectively remediating 533 samples, which are counting up to the 74.5%. And among all those samples, there's 465 samples running the Java bytecode execution routine, and meanwhile, there's another 75 samples running the JS payload. There's a few overlappings which running both types of the routines to enable more diversity here. And also, in case of the JavaScript payload routines, if it doesn't really run in the arbitrary code, I can also pinpoint the capabilities which facilitates the different remediation strategies in the future. We're also able to evaluate the backend hosting the malicious payload from all these samples. As a result, we found 158 backends, which here we're listing the top 15 of those as based on the numbers of the connected samples. We found like the single payload can be evenly abused and fetched by 77 samples across 2 families with 3 different routines. And also, it can be even a more complex case since the attacker can build a subnet on the Cloudflare and to serve the 43 samples to fetching 7 different similar but still different payloads from those backends. Additionally, there's no surprisingly that the benign service provider, they can always be abused by the attacker to serving the malicious content to the malware, however, at this moment has been neutralized. Last but not least, we look into how the attacker building their payload implementation routines, and we group those by their high-level implementation idea. We found the most popular one is the attacker trying to using the JSON to decode and encode their APK payloads through 297 samples from 5 families. And meanwhile, there is also 9 Java bytecode routines implementing some code verification with MD5 algorithm, which actually requires additional steps for the incident responder to take down the malwares, which has been discussed in paper for more details. There's also 1 Java bytecode routine using the XOR for encoding their payload. In that case, I guess you can just try to bypassing the network traffic analysis or blockers. And meanwhile, there's also 5 samples using a complex encoding sequence to hiding their HTML payload. So this is all the routines have been found in our evaluation. However, Echo is designed to handling some more advanced routines. Feel free to check our papers for more details. This is almost the end of my presentation, but there's definitely much more in the paper. We got the full running examples with our demo video, and there's also 2 more case studies. We also detailed the detailed implementation of the Echo's routine modeling in our design, and also we provide the more in-depth countermeasures against the adversarial attackers in our discussion. Last, let me just thank our collaborator again, and please feel free to check our demo video and open source code online. Thanks everyone for being here. I'm open for any questions.
Yeah, please walk to the mic if you have questions.
Hi, really interesting presentation. US law enforcement has been doing this same sort of thing for about a decade. I was wondering if you have any idea how the methods they're using are similar or different from what you're using, and why is your method better?
Yeah, I think thanks for the question. I think that's a very interesting one, because as we learn, actually I'm getting one of the slides here to talk about who is Peter, and this is exactly the things we described. There's actually some law enforcement is trying to deploy that, but as far as I've learned, those things are still, as we discussed in the talk, it's still heavily relying on the reverse engineering task from the manual labeling. So those things can be not really automated to fulfill the whole step. However, the question is how fast the people can do this, to competing with the malware author. They can just starting their backup server in a couple minutes. And still, here is we are trying to proposing such kind of the automated pipeline to quickly facilitating this rather than relying on the people to take the hours or even days of work to facilitate this until it's too late to really to getting ahead of some advance against attacker launching the backup servers to making all these things meaningless.
So it's the automation that's the novelty, not the fact that you are distributing the patch, the patch distribution to override the botnet. That's old, but the new part is that you're doing it automatically. Thanks for bringing that up. It's also we consider because it is the first research we have conducted to really bring this out in a more systematic way to pinpoint what kind of the steps will be taken by the incident responders to do how to analyzing the malware samples, how to pinpoint the CNC backend, and what they need to figure out. And I think that's kind of the things we need to more systematic way to think of and to really bring this up to, and of course to automate it this one.
Okay, we still have a few more minutes. If you have questions, you can walk to the mic and ask. So I will ask a question. So what kind of behaviors you can remove or interrupt from the remediation?
Yeah, I think so. If I'm understanding the question correctly, like how what's the actual actual result we can achieve to at the end of the day removing the malware, right? So it's really depending on the how malware implementing their payload deployment routines. So let's say like if malware is implementing the arbitrary code execution capabilities, it's just really at least giving a lot of freedom for the malware author. It's all against the instance responder, the Peter, a lot of the capabilities because you can just run the code to either notify the user, they can just pop up some message on the screen, and he can just, even the code can be directly removing the malware samples under the legal authorities. But however, there can be the case like they only implementing a very limited routines. In that case, only receive some particular commands, and in that case, really doesn't really do a lot. That's why the echo still fails on some of the evaluation that we discussed before, because the routine is very limited. It doesn't really give a lot of freedom to the malware author. As well, it also doesn't really get the Peter a lot of chance. But in some ways, it's still like even some cases like Peter can just show up a message or even a view for the user. Then that gains a lot of chance for the end user to really removing this malware from their device.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we conclude this session, and let's thank all our speakers again.